Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? A little bit better? Okay, perfect. I'm Imran Chaudhry. I'm a solutions director at MarkLogic. Have been with MarkLogic for about 3 years now. Have been focused on life sciences and healthcare.
And I'm Mark Furno. I've been with MarkLogic for 4 years, and I am the consulting practice manager for healthcare and life sciences. And I'm actually particularly happy to see a number of my clients in the room, so welcome today.
So what we'll be talking about is 360-degree views of important business objects in the healthcare space and life sciences space. But let's start off with what's going on in the healthcare and life sciences space. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of uncertainty going on here. Some of the key aspects of it are shown here. This particular graph shows almost a 250% increase in healthcare costs. And down here, you only have a 60% increase in salaries and stuff over the last quarter century. That's a major problem. CMS has been working on it. A lot of health insurance companies are working on it. And we as people are feeling it in general. In the last 15 years, the number of people that have put off healthcare treatment because of cost has doubled. And it's gone up to 1/3 of the people out there. Right? So healthcare costs are becoming a real problem for people and their health. So over the last few years, or in 2015, MACRA was put in place. But an interesting number here is that 2/3 of the physicians who are responsible for MACRA have no idea what the heck MACRA is, right? And when you start thinking about it, what is it? It's a program that Medicare has put together to address cost and risk, and it provides performance incentives for the providers to actually do the right things. If they do the wrong things, they lose up to 9% of their revenue. If they do the right things, they gain up to 26% bonuses, right? So it's a huge amount of variability and swing in a organization's ability to actually survive, right? The amount of change in revenue is actually greater than the amount of profit these organizations make, right? So this is a big deal. But that number out there is really, really scary. And this graphic is pretty applicable, actually. Another interesting thing came out of a HIM survey in this year was that success for MACRA really needs clinical, financial, and operational data sets together. You cannot do this anymore in your own old silos, right? The silos are just not going to work. And if you don't start integrating your data sets together and start looking at them in real time, you're going to start missing opportunities, and you're going to start not providing the quality of care that you need, and that's going to cause some serious issues for revenue. Then, of course, there's what we got going on with regards to how people are going to get paid and what the new plans are going to be like, right? The latest one is just something I pulled off literally 2 days ago, right? And it's just continuing to go. And this uncertainty means that you need to be able to react very, very quickly and change what's important to you and how you're managing your patients and how you're paying for your patients and how you're doing drug discovery. All of that ties together, and all of that needs you as an organization to have the ability to change very, very rapidly. So we've talked about a couple of things here, right? New regulations and new monetization strategies are critical right now for the change. But there's a whole bunch of other things that are changing. And in fact, in healthcare and in, I'd say, almost any other IT-driven industry, change is the new normal. You cannot expect things to stay the same anymore. In fact, on the data level side, you better expect everything to change and better be ready for change at any given point in time. Right? Your data can change. Where it comes from can change. How that data is accessed can change. And who accesses the data can change. And who needs to access the data can change. Right? if you're not building a data-driven strategy, and if you're not worried about how flexible and agile your data is right now in healthcare, in life sciences, you're in big trouble. So let's take a look at a 360-degree challenge that I personally worked on. One of the interesting pieces of the puzzle was that the organization I was working with had a lot of mainframe data sets. They understood their business objects, right? The business objects were very important to them, were their members, their claims, their providers, their individual people, their prescriptions. And they were able to get data out and had legacy applications that consumed that data, but they were running into performance bottlenecks and limits in tying those data sets together and answering questions that they needed to answer for their operations. And then along comes a new need. Hey, we need to start building a consumer-oriented set of products. We need to allow mobile cell phones to be interactive with our people. We need to get the consumers off of calling us and self-serving themselves so that our costs can go down. All sorts of interesting sort of things came up. To do that, they decided to pick up best-of-breed products. They said, okay, well, some of the stuff in our mainframe is still good, let's use it. Some of the stuff we want to do in a brand new way, let's do that. Some of our consumers are changing. Our consumers are going mobile. Our consumer applications, we're going to start using SaaS to do some of our CRM type of stuff. All sorts of interesting sort of things came into play with regards to architecting a brand new product that ran a lot faster and was able to run at a much lower cost. But once you did that, once you started to say, hey, I'm no longer in a monolithic environment, I'm now going to spread out my data sets across all of these sources of data, I now have a pretty serious HA and performance SLA requirement that my source systems can't meet anymore, right? If one of my systems is a SQL Server environment and the largest SQL Server machine that I can reasonably buy is only going to give me 2,000 transactions per second, and I need 10,000 transactions per second, I have a problem, right? And oh, by the way, the regulation says we got to go into production in 9 months. Did I say 9 years? No, 9 months, right? Really. So this was the hard deadline we were working with. And by the way, I was told that I was on this project about 15 days before I actually got on board and started working with the team. So that was kind of interesting. So your old way of doing things takes 2 to 3 to 4 years, right? You really can't afford that anymore, especially when you have deadlines that are 9 months long and the requirements can change along the way, right? So the old way of doing things was, hey, let's do it in a waterfall fashion. But again, the minute you start doing it in a waterfall fashion and it's a 3-year project and you've defined your requirements in year 1, you now have a problem when things change in year 3, right? That's a big deal. So people have gone agile. And this is really not a talk about agile, right? And agile makes sense. If you can time box a development, do some end-to-end developing, and produce data sets and produce solutions that actually are somewhat functional, not totally, but somewhat functional, end-to-end, you're solving a problem. And then while you're developing it, you can start analyzing and then do another release and continue this process. And what's nice about this is that now I have the ability to react, right? But let's take a look at the Agile process in a little more detail and say, hey, what about this piece of the design, build, and test piece? If I end up using a relational database for design, build, and test, I'm going to run into, design the application. All right, here's what I'm going to do in this next month or next 2 months or whatever my time box is. I'm going to figure out, okay, which pieces of the data do I need? All right, then I'm going to figure out what are my queries that I need to ask. Then I'm going to have to go, all right, what's the structure of my database that I need to change or modify to answer those queries? Then I'm going to have to build my database or build scripts that take my existing database and modify them because this is a sort of time-based project and I already assume a presumably have a database that I'm working on. Then I got to figure out how to load that new data into my database, right? So I have to spend time on extract, transfer, and load scripts and strategies and all that kind of stuff. Then I have to load it. Then I got to actually do the work that I'm supposed to be doing in the sprint, which is code the new functionality, and then test. And God forbid something changes during that time or some bugs are there, right? I got to go back through that whole process all over again, right? This is basically incompatible with Agile development. That's the conclusion I came to when I started doing this kind of stuff, when I started doing Agile development on SQL databases. And you play all sorts of tricks, right? You build in multiple reserved columns. You go, okay, stuff is going to happen. I don't want to change the database. I just want to start overloading stuff, right? And that makes the database harder to understand, and the meaning of that data that's in the database harder to understand as well. So your design, build, and test, which is supposed to be a short, quick circle, is now a very, very long piece of time. You have two choices, right? Either in 1 month you do a lot less than you were supposed to do because you just have to do all these steps, or you just take a lot longer. And neither of those are viable in our current healthcare and life sciences environment. So you were shooting for something like this, and you end up with something a lot slower, right, or a lot less. So what I'm here to talk about is really a new definition of data, which is that your data itself needs to be fluid and agile. And I went to the dictionary and looked it up, and it said, hey, agile is data that is something that is able to move quickly and easily, right? So that made a lot of sense to me. And what that really means is, hey, I can suck my data in quickly. I can find it quickly. I can, in place, make it more useful and more reusable, and then I can expose it quickly, right? Those are the sort of things you need to make your data fluid, right? Think concrete for relational versus water for an agile data store, right? And this is kind of the graphical, all right? Bring the data in, figure out where it is, harmonize it and enrich it, and then expose it. So let's look at each one of these pieces. Bring the data in means to bring it in as is, but it also means to bring in any kind of data. It also means to keep your metadata with your data so that you can figure out where the heck this data came from, when did it get updated, what was the real world event this data is all about, which software version that I released created this row in my database because this row, that version had a bug in it, and I want to figure out which of those pieces in my million rows or billion rows is the ones that I need to fix, right? And also, when data changes, accept that data, right? Don't reject it. But here's the key, right? One of the key things that comes with bringing the data in fluidly is a contract on the consumption side. You tell the consumer, hey, dude, if you see something that you don't understand, don't crash. Please just ignore it, right? If you have that level of contract with your consumers, all of a sudden, this requirement that I'm asking you to think about becomes a lot easier. You have a freight train's worth of change capability built into your system, right? You can bring in new data every day. And as long as the clients don't crap out on it, you're good to go. Right, so bringing the data in as is a very, very important tenet of Agile data. The next piece is now that I have the data, if I have a lot of different kinds of data, then I need to figure out what it is I'm looking for and find it, right? And it's no longer, oh, I need to look at the name column or I need to look at the zip code column, because those things might be different for each of the sources of data that I'm bringing in. And they might not exist in some of the data sets either, right? So the idea here is to basically take that data and say, hey, I can look at this data four or five different ways. I can look at it as documents. I can look at it as graphs. I can look at it as in-memory key value pairs. I can look at it as geospatial data. I can look at it as tables. And this is exactly what MarkLogic 9 is all about when it comes to the Optic API. It's the ability to say, I don't care how that data looked originally. If I need to look at it as a graph right now, I'm going to look at it as a graph right now. Right? So this multi-model aspect is actually a very, very important part of being a fluid data set. And then once you get the data and have found the right pieces of the data, then you want to make that data usable consistently across all of your different clients, right? So first name, FN, first underscore name, all those things you shouldn't care about as a consumer of that data set, where they came from, when they came. You definitely need to consider that from a provenance and governance perspective, but as a consumer, I don't need to know about it, and I should care less about it, right? And so the ability to take data, promote it into an enterprise class version of that data set, and then also take the relationships between the data sets and store that in the data itself, along with the data, and take it away from the ORM tool, right? So or the code, or the developer's head, or a sticky on somebody's monitor, right? That this means this. It is the minute you can take all that out and actually persist that and keep it in your database, you now have what I call real agile data. So your business objects and semantics together, and the relationships between them, is really this. If I had to bring this down to one slide, this is the slide that I would say is really what agile data is all about, right? And examples of business objects in the healthcare space and life sciences space are patients, right? Providers, symptoms, treatments, claims, right? These are very large sorts of domains of knowledge that make sense. And it's really easy to say, this patient has had these problems, has had these treatments, is treated by this provider, and has had these claims submitted to the insurance company. Right? Those are all things that you and I as people can understand, and I don't need to be a techie to understand that. Right? So if I can persist that in the database with my patient object, all of a sudden, that data becomes a heck of a lot more usable. An example of this is a simple graph ontology, right? A CAT scan is a radiology procedure. Neuroblastoma is a type of cancer located near an adrenal gland, which is also located near another anatomical structure called a kidney. And let's say I'm building an application, and my application manages radiology reports and communicates radiology reports between my radiology system and my regular EMR that my primary care doctor manages, right? So great, I build this application, and here I put in just two types of semantic concepts into this physical report, right? That, hey, the consulting physician found a neuroblastoma, and he performed a CAT scan. Now, let's say another part of the organization comes in and says, hey, I want to do A/B testing on different drugs for patients that have had cancers near kidneys. I'm out of luck if the only thing I have in my document is the fact that this is a CAT scan and neuroblastoma. But on the other hand, if I have this additional reference data, I can find this document. And my research team can start using that A/B testing model to start doing tests and seeing what sort of medications are being used to treat these kinds of patients. Right, and once you go multimodal, it's no longer just a simple, oh, I want to generalize semantically my query. I can use any fact in the model to do any kind of a query that I want, right? So now I can say, hey, tell me about all patients who have cancers in your kidneys in the last 12 months that went to an ER, that were treated by a doctor where they didn't have insurance 6 months prior. Now the research I'm doing here is going to be probably along the lines of, hey, what is the effect of having health insurance versus not having health insurance? A big political topic these days too, right? So once you have the data, once you've enriched it and made it consistent, then exposing it and making it available to the rest of your organization either in real time or in batch or as needed, and in a way that you're not having to worry about, oh, shoot, I'm running out of space, I'm running out of performance, what do I do, right? I'm going to take some of this data and archive it off and throw it away and lock it up in a vault because I can't hold on to it anymore, right? Those are all very important aspects. The enterprise class aspects of data and being able to run your data in the cloud or in my own data center as necessary are very important aspects of Agile data. In fact, I had one customer where we did a very quick POC where within 2 to 3 days, we were able to take the PHI part and the non-PHI part and shove all the PHI to AWS and keep the PHI local and have the same data set available in both places. Just parts of it are served up from one place, other parts are served up from another place. So this operational flexibility is definitely another very important aspect of Agile data. And the net result is that you really can produce stuff a lot faster, right? Or you can do a lot more in the same time box. And you're looking at a short, quick 1 month sort of thing, 2 week sort of thing versus doing the same sort of stuff in months or years. Let's go back and take a look at our healthcare problem, right? We've already seen this. So what our customer decided to do is they decided to use MarkLogic for all the things that I just talked about, right? They wanted to decouple their SLAs. And they were actually thinking of, hey, let's just do live translations of that data set. And once I pointed out that your HA and your performance SLAs get totally decoupled if you start storing the data, they very rapidly moved into the storing the data in the central repository instead of just doing it live. And the overall architecture was, we had the different kinds of data sources, right? We had the different domains of data, but we also had real-time messages. So we had some pieces of the data that we needed to bring in real time very rapidly. And so what we did is we put together a message handler that consumed the messages that were on the IBM message queue. And then that message handler knew, okay, for this kind of data, I have a sub handler that goes and uses this API to get it, and that API to get it. And because it's really, really easy to put very simple REST calls into MarkLogic and produce APIs to pull the data, we were able to integrate a lot of these things in real time, custom built for each source that we needed to bring in. But it didn't take a lot of time to do it. Then we also had the issue of, okay, once we have that data in here, we wanted it to look like an enterprise class version of that data. We wanted to expose that out to all of our consumers. And we also needed to keep track of, hey, where did the data come from? Which software version made that data set and so on. So we had this team of people out here that was looking at the provenance and enterprise models and the relationships that we needed to take care of. So now this was an interesting part of the problem, right? We had this aggressive 9-month schedule, right? And it wasn't going to be one Scrum team that was going to do this. It wasn't going to be 2 Scrum teams. In order to build a brand new product from scratch, we needed like 24 teams to make that happen, right? Now this is going to put an extreme load on the modeling team, right? Each of these teams is going to go, hey, I want this, 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 right? It's just going to happen, right? So I'm like, okay, let them ask for and demand what they need to do their jobs, right? So what did we do? We released a new model every week. And we told the Scrum teams, go ahead, pick whichever model suits you, right? Some Scrum teams are going to stay down here and go, hey, I'm totally cool with the model I got. I don't need any changes. Other Scrum teams are going to change the model every week because they need the changes in their requirements, and their understanding of those requirements is changing on a weekly basis, right? But of course, when you do that, you got chaos, right? So we said, hey, every quarter, we're going to make everybody get on the latest model and test it. It shouldn't affect you, but if it does, change your code to handle what? And then we did that for 3 quarters, and in 9 months, we had a single model that we released into production. But over the course of time, because our data was agile, we had roughly 38 models in flight over that 9 months. Right, another kind of view into that is, hey, team 1 decides to use model 1.1, team 10 decides to use the same model. Team 2 goes, oh, I need something different. Team 3 goes, I need something different. And those teams used later versions of those same models. End of Q1, we said, everybody catch up. We're going to relabel this schema, call it schema 2. Actually, we played a trick where we started the first schema and we released it as 2 models, schema 1.1 and schema 2.0. The teams could decide to continue to use schema 2.0 throughout their whole development process and get whatever changes they got without having to think about it, or they could explicitly choose the model. Right? And then we did the same thing for schema 3.0, and then we did the same thing for schema 4.0, right? So the ability to handle the change, the ability to not worry about which team was using which one, really allowed these teams to work in parallel at a rate that is pretty unprecedented. And you know, what's nice is that even if you didn't get the model right the first time, you can still use it to create end-to-end functionality in a short period of time, right? So the net result was that we finished the project in 9 months versus a legacy time of about 3 years, right? So that was almost a 4x improvement in time. And operationally, I was told that the new product cost about half to run than the previous products. Some of the 360-degree views we put together were plans, persons, members, providers, claims, prescriptions. And you know, these are all objects that make a lot of sense to people, right? It's not like you have to really work too hard at the level of granularity that you need to start producing business objects that make sense. And sure. Absolutely. So the SLAs were for response times for requests in real time to be less than a second. And after about 3 months in production, we had it down to 60 milliseconds. Yeah, I would say it was an order of magnitude less in cost. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Imran. I'm going to take some of the principles that Imran was just discussing with respect to Agile data and processes and speak about a current project that we're working on with one of our life sciences clients. Before I do that, I'd like to ask you a question. If you consider yourself part of pharma or biotech or life sciences, please put your hand up. Everyone else everyone else healthcare, or just really like Imran or myself? Healthcare does rule. Right, well, that's why I am the practice manager for healthcare and life sciences, so I get to enjoy many of you. All right, so essentially what I'm going to do is jump into a little bit of background about what many of our life sciences clients actually have to deal with. So we've all seen the rapid advancement of pharma companies working diligently to bring new products to the market, right? Pharma news inundates us daily, just as healthcare does, right? These life sciences companies are trying to bring out new compounds to address new conditions for different segments of the population. Now, the rate of which the number of trials is increasing, as you can tell, is pretty significant, right? In fact, certain life science companies, pharma companies, may at this very moment be running hundreds of clinical trials simultaneously. These clinical trials can last many years and have thousands and thousands of subjects or participants taking place in them. Now, in order to manage this data, they use something called a clinical trial management system, right? Makes sense, right? Or a CTMS. Now, essentially, what a CTMS does is it manages all of the various aspects of a clinical trial, right? So it manages data about the sites, that's the locations where the trials are actually conducted. It keeps track of the subjects, the people that are actually involved in the trials. It manages the protocols. It manages information about the investigators. It manages everything that you can possibly imagine about a clinical trial, all the data that's captured about the subjects throughout the life of it as well. Now, in theory, this is great, right? A CTMS is a perfect solution. It captures data, it provides it to other systems. And these other systems are often downstream, maybe relational systems. And I think probably everybody in this room is aware that maybe relational systems are not the most adaptable to data that changes. And that's exactly what happens. Today's clinical trials are not static events. When you start one, you don't know if you're going to change the protocol midstream. You don't know if you're going to change the questions or the measurements that you're going to need to take throughout a different phase. You may add sites, other locations. You may add more criteria to refine the set of participants that you want to participate in a particular clinical trial. And if you think relational systems adapt well to data changing or the structure of data changing, you're probably at the wrong conference. So here we have a little picture, very simple. I don't have the graphic, swing that Imran has, or the swagger. But essentially, just a little diagram. On the left, think of it, the CTMS, or your clinical trial management system, as really the system that's managing this data, and it's sending structured data out. And that data is being, landed in an area where it may be picked up by a variety of systems, right? Some of these systems might be something like SAS, right? You want to do a little bit of calculation on that data. Or you may want to put it in a different relational system that's going to feed further downstream environments. At the same time, right, you may have BI tools, or you may have actually something that will take changes in your data. So you may have a number of systems being fed by this information. But what we see is if you change the shape of your data, unfortunately, typically, some things are going to break. So what our client saw is that if they wanted to introduce a change to their clinical trial, it would take them at a minimum 1 month to deploy a change to their downstream relational systems so that they wouldn't break. So what does this do? Well, in some ways, to a degree, it sort of hampers their progress, right? Additionally, it means that those downstream systems that could accept the changes, right? Something maybe like a reporting system that can take CSV data or something, it's not going to explode, right? They're starved out until they do enough validation on the relational systems downstream that they know it's not going to break, and then they let the floodgates loose. Then they let that change data go downstream. Anybody think that's a good solution? All right, I didn't think so either. So what did we do, right? So put your hand up if you've heard of the Data Hub framework. All right, good. We're doing a good job then. All right, so essentially we chose the Data Hub framework as the solution of choice for this problem. And I'll talk in a minute about why that's a good solution. But before I do that, in my role as a practice manager for healthcare and life sciences, I have to honestly say that every project that comes across our desk now, everyone we are recommending the Data Hub framework as the solution for that. Doesn't mean it's the best one for everything, but everyone that we're seeing from our clients, the Data Hub framework is a great solution. Now, Imran touched on some of those reasons, but I'm going to hit them too. So first of all, we have the concept of ingest as is, right? You bring your data in, and it's good. Your data changes. It's still good, right? So if you want to go ahead and roll out some changes, MarkLogic is going to go ahead, and it's going to take in that data without a problem. So in this case, the changing data was different sites or additional sites or different questions, all sorts of things related to the clinical trial that were changing. Now, once the data is in MarkLogic, we go through a harmonization process, right? We create a canonical representation of that data. And we do that by taking some of that original source data, combining it, enriching it, really creating an entity out of it, right? So the idea of an entity is something that is maybe tangible. So something like a person, right, might be, you know, a good sort of 360 canonical model representation. So for us, that would be something called a clinical report form or a CRF form. And really that's the data that's captured during one of these a site visit or a visit where a subject comes and actually meets with someone who's going to take their you know, information about how they're feeling once they've been on this protocol, or you know, how much have they been taking or what else they've been taking. And the great news about this canonical representation is we can then create reports in a variety of formats for downstream systems. And we're actually using MarkLogic 9's template-driven extraction to do that. So what that means is we have this canonical view of your data. We can actually apply templates to that data so your downstream systems see the views and information that they want. So if your incoming data changes, okay, it's fine. The templates are still talking over here to the harmonized. You can change your harmonization code, and you can optionally change your templates to provide that new information to your downstream systems or not. They may not be ready for it. That's okay. You can still bring it into MarkLogic and work with it, right? That makes a big difference. Something that was important to this client was the ability to make templates configurable. They didn't want to have to require the services of programmers to change the templates, so that's something that we're working on right now, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. Configurability was a key part also of why we chose the Data Hub framework, because once you get into it, at the time that you start using it, you will see that there is this very clearly defined flow of your data, from ingest all the way to your downstream systems. You can change it at any one of those steps, and the system just works. So on the bottom, ingest as is, harmonize, enrich, and then operationalize it by sending it downstream to your systems. And the downstream systems can be really anything. All right, so here, it's not much of an eye chart in this room. So essentially, if you haven't seen this architecture, it's really more of a sort of day in the life of data going through the MarkLogic Data Hub framework, right? It's really sort of the path that data takes. So on the left side, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can juggle both of these at once. That might be a bit of a challenge. But so on your left side, we've got your source systems, right? You have your clinical trial data that's coming from your CTMS. We have information about investigators. We have other data, like this non-clinical report form data, providing sort of enriched information or other things about your clinical trial. And they all come into MarkLogic as is. Now, we bring them into this thing called a staging database. Actually, this doesn't work particularly. There we go. A staging database. And that's really where the as-is data lives. And once we bring it in, we do a few things to it. We tag it. We can say things like, hey, it came from this particular CTMS, like CTMS A, not CTMS B. It came from this URL. It came in on this day. It's for this particular clinical study, right? It's for this particular subject in a clinical study. We can do all of that tagging as metadata, And then we will use that possibly later when you want to go ahead and harmonize it. But when it comes in staging the first time, what you might want to do is you might want to look at it. You might want to do a little bit of search on it, right? You might want to sort of look at the shape of your data, get an understanding of what it looks like, how it's coming in. Because what that's going to help you do, it's going to help inform how you want to write your transform to harmonize into your canonical model. I can't tell you how valuable it is to be able to bring in the data as is and look at it. Because that process alone speeds up your ability to deliver quickly to your internal clients or your external clients, depending what side of the desk you sit on. All right, so we do the harmonization. Now we've got sort of different structure documents, right? So what we're looking at there, essentially, is a representation of something a little more physical or holistic. So it might be a, it could be a person 360, it could be a 360 about a clinical study. Those probably get pretty big. So for our purposes, what we're doing for this one particular client, the harmonized data, like primary data structure or size, is really a report form from a single visit for a single study for a single subject on a given day. That's actually what they want. That's the granularity they're looking for. And then once we have that, it's immediately available for search. So you can put a UI on it and search it. Great, right? Data Hub Framework isn't a UI, right? It's got a little bit of UI for the flow, but you can put a UI on top of it. And if you want to search that data, great, go for it. But additionally, what you can do is down here, that's where you can put on your TDE, your templates, that really give you that specific view that your downstream systems are looking for. So if you have like a SaaS system that wants to pull in data, okay, so you're going to create maybe like an ODBC sort of view for that data and deliver that. Maybe you have multiple versions of that for different systems or for different views, right? You want something that's going to deliver you CSV or XML for an adverse event reporting system. Great. It's all coming off of the same harmonized data. All right, so just getting to the end here. So results, so we actually completed this pilot with a small team in 6 weeks. And so when I say pilot, at MarkLogic, pilot has a special, sort of concept around it. It means we pulled data from a real system. We didn't take just like someone like exported some CSV and just said, hey, you guys go play with this. We were pulling it from real CTMS systems. And those CTMS actually aren't hosted by our client. They're from a third party. And then we were able to deliver that data to real downstream systems. So 6 weeks, pretty good. We did go ahead and create the harmonized data model in the size that I was talking about, the clinical report form. And that's what they are basically creating all of their downstream reports off of. So their adverse event system, their sort of overall data warehouse that's going to feed other systems. They do have SaaS. They do have a whole variety of systems hanging off of it. So now, if they want to go ahead and make a change to their clinical trial data, they can make that change. They don't have to wait a month or more, because it's not going to break the chain for the downstream systems. Right? So those systems that can accept it, get it right away. Those that can't, whenever they're ready, they can change the template that's being used. And so the most important thing to me is that this was successful, and we're working with this client right now to productionalize this and deliver it later this year. So for them, it's days to new data, weeks, months to implementation. So it's months, not years overall. Sure. Yeah, so the third-party data source that I was talking about actually is the CTMS. So they're using a product called Metadata Rave, and essentially Metadata is a company which offers their clinical trial management systems as a service. So you get data feeds of your information, and the data for that is culled from a variety of different other systems sort of feeding it. And then you get the client, in our case, a pharma company, gets the data to pass to their systems for their internal use. So for this, so far, it has not. The only place that we were considering at the time using any ontology, quite honestly, was just for provenance. And we were looking at Provo. I'm not sure we actually leverage Provo for this project, but we do maintain provenance information sort of throughout. So we track the logic version that was used for the ingest and the harmonization and everything else, as well as the connection back to the original system.
For the project that we were working on, it was all structured data, so we didn't need too much ontology information. But I have been working with other projects where we are doing
it. Yeah. Well, so the question was, for our harmonized models, did we choose XML or JSON? And so my response is, it's really dependent on what particular use case and data you're working with and your downstream systems and everything else. That being said, for our purposes, on this project, we used XML.
And we used XML as well on the project that I was referring to. So the operational data hub itself, it gives you a lot of the tool set to do a lot of the harmonization, right? There's configuration-based harmonization, and then there's spots where you can drop in small code snippets to do additional harmonization. Configuration, when you know when it's constant and really easy to do one-to-one sort of mappings. When you have to say, okay, if this field is M and this field is followed by a 2 or greater than 2, then do such and such, that's a little bit of code, right? And so you can drop that into a very simple spot.
I have a question. So when you said you can create ODBC view on the data after harmonizing, is it going to be in a columnar way of data, so we can just apply regular ANSYS equal on it?
Yes, yes. So the whole point of your business object is to create, in the harmonization process, once you define an entity in MarkLogic 9, you've essentially created a virtual table. And then the different attributes in that end up being columns in that table.
Can this be done in 8 version 8?
You can. You have to do coding, not configuring. So the difference between 8 and 9 is not functionality, but how quickly you can get to that harmonized view.
Thank you.
So I haven't done harmonization with ontologies just yet. The previous speaker that was here was using Provo to do provenance-based harmonization of the data sets.
Yeah, so maybe that's the same question, but then if you harmonize data from different sources, how do you track the lineage? Like where pieces of the data came from originally rather than the whole thing?
Right, so the same spot in the code which is doing the transformation, that's going to have to add harmonization information into the enterprise class model version of your data set. Oh, one more over there.
My client? So honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I believe so, because I think that's sort of part of their flow, but that's not something that was actually exposed to us.
All right, thank you very much.